Welcome to Week 4 of the President's Athletic Conference Football Focus. I'm Waynesburg University senior Andy Stanko, and this week our focus turns to the Geneva College Golden Tornadoes. Geneva enters Week 4 of the season searching for its first official conference victory of the season. The Golden Tornadoes are led for the 24th consecutive season by Geno DeMarco, the program's all-time winningest coach. Up next for Geneva is a conference matchup with Teal College for the first time since 2013. Each week, the PAC Football Focus features one team from around the conference. We'll take a look into the program and highlight all of Saturday's matchups to get you ready for the weekend with the PAC Pregame Show following the Football Focus, when two other Waynesburg students and I will break down every matchup involving PAC teams in Week 4. Coach Geno DeMarco has enjoyed great success on the gridiron at Geneva since his playing days in the early 1980s. He was the school's first NAIA Academic All-American at linebacker and took the reins of the program in 1993. Since then, Geneva's qualified for the postseason constantly through the 2000s, and Reeves Field remains one of the premier home field advantages in all of Division III. However, Coach DeMarco made a choice after consecutive 2-8 seasons to take his offense in a different direction.
We're a triple option team now. We made that decision shortly after last season's last game, and the reason we did it is because it fits with the type of student athlete we get at Geneva. We get kids that are, very disciplined, fits very well with the scheme, and the fact that nobody does it anymore. At the point in my career right now where I can run the triple option, some young coaches shy away from it because it's just not an entertaining thing that the Division II and Division I schools are doing. So it's just something that really fits. We also changed, defensively what we were doing, and it's so far our kids are excited about what's going on. They've bought into it. I had a great coaching staff that's pushing them every day, and I think we're going to just continually get better.
Coach DeMarco had considered the triple option in the past, but had not committed the entire program to that style of football until now.
Ran a little bit of the zone read stuff. Actually studied the triple when we had Rocco Colavecchia here. And then it got to the point where we were just doing a little bit of it. And then he was such a great player that we basically just went empty and let him carry the ball in a single wing type thing. But, I've been studying it now for about 3 or 4 years. But never fully committed to it. And I think that's what you have to do. You have to totally change your program. You have to change the way you lift, the way you recruit, your philosophy as far as clock management. And it's almost countercultural in today's Division I football to be running this kind of thing. I mean, it's old school football that some of the old listeners would remember. Back in their high school days, we want to run the clock, run the football, stop the run, and, win the game in the kicking phase.
3 games into the triple option era of Geneva football, Coach DeMarco knows from experience that it's a learning process every week to build a foundation for success on both sides of the ball.
Like anything, we're staying within a system, and we're really not jumping to page 2 until we get a really good foundation of what we're doing. And we're pretty adamant about that. Actually, in all 3 phases of what we're doing now in our system of play. So the one thing about football is you keep learning. I mean, you keep learning. I mean, when we were here, started back in 93, we were running a shade 50 that was basically a Michigan defense we got from West Virginia. And we were running I formation. Then we evolved into the odd stack, and offensively we went to pistol as soon as that came out. Then we got a couple really good quarterbacks. We went to the air raid. Defensively, we've kind of got a hybrid 3-5 right now that I think our kids are really buying into. So, the short answer is I don't know if you ever master it. I think you continually improve on it. But certainly, for us, the learning curve right now is pretty steep, and we devote it every day in the off season to learning about this stuff.
Goals for any offense include putting up yards and points, but Coach DeMarco stresses the importance of taking care of the football in his triple option scheme.
I think if you talk to any option team, you're going to look at yards rushing, you're going to look at first downs, you're going to look at time of possession. The thing that you want to do in any football game is you want to be able to end every series with a kick, and that, even if that means it's a punt. And we didn't do that last week. We fumbled the ball. Ironically, it wasn't off of any of the option meshes. It was just kids trying to make an effort. That you turn the ball over, you're going to lose, and that's what happened. I think that's it. I mean, the time of possession thing comes into play. We want to run the clock. There's no secret about that. And after running the hurry up for 10 years, nothing's more frustrating than having an offense that practices that way, sitting on the sideline, and they can't go. They got to wait. So, for us, it's a brand new thing for us that really goes back to an older approach that we had, in the 90s.
For Geneva, a commitment to the triple option changes what you see on the field on Saturday, but the week of preparation leading up to game day is altered as well.
And it's changed very much. I mean, anybody that does this has to make a complete change. We were looking at it 3 years ago. We just weren't at the point where we were ready to change our approach from practice style. It definitely changes the way you practice. We're fortunate that we're able to do some things that can help our defense. It's tough for defense to see, a spread offense after, or not see one during the week. The benefit, though, of what we're doing is when we do a lot of group work, our pad level is much lower, and it's just it's a difference of opinion. I mean, in today's football world, you get really big kids, you zone block, and you cover people up, and you get a running back that can make a cut. In our world, we're getting our shorter linemen that really right now for our recruiting seems to be the kids that we're getting that are very powerful, that can stay low and get on their pads, and we're using leverage, is our way of trying to move the football. And the entire program has to change. It just can't change by calling a few plays. We've changed the entire program.
Geneva's triple option attack has room to grow, but Coach DeMarco wants to see players master the basics before moving on to the various possibilities that come with the triple option.
We're game planning for this week. Right now we're in the phase of we're going to run our stuff, not try to get too cute too quick. But there will come a time when you run a play action pass, you better hit the route. You better be able to run a little bit of 3-step. You better be able to run some misdirection pass. You need that to be able to move the football, because today's defensive guys, they show all kinds of different looks. So, we don't have a schedule as far as when things are going to be implemented, but I see this offense that the opportunities are there are many opportunities in this offense to grow with it. We're trying to be as simplistic as possible right now.
Turnovers have plagued the Golden Tornadoes through the first 3 weeks of the season, including last week's 28-21 loss to St. Vincent College. Geneva's turned the ball over 7 times and has a league-worst turnover margin of -4. Despite a 1-2 start to the season, Geneva's been competitive and within a score of its opponent in the second half of every game of the year. But turnovers have swung the games.
It's easy to say, listen, you just don't have turnovers and you win. Well, it's a little more difficult than that. I mean, when you run the football and you got kids that are trying to get the extra yardage and they may be extending the ball, you got to work on different techniques. You got to be able to reteach, ball security. You got to be able to reteach keeping the ball up high with the quarterback. Our punter has really helped us, and I think we got one of the better long snappers in the league, and he's very, very good. He just snapped it over the punter's head, and that was flipped the field, and it was like a pick six. I mean, it was a touchdown. They picked the ball up and ran with it. But we expect to be in every game. That's our expectation. We got to get past being in the game. We got to be able to understand how to win, and that there's no secret to that. You just have to continue to work through these issues, and you got to do it on the practice field.
This week, Geneva's opponent is Teal College. The Tomcats have a league-high 11 takeaways in the season, and quarterback Ryan Radke is among the league's most explosive playmakers.
There's a lot of energy there. You can see it on the tape. You can see that when a team scores non-offensive touchdowns, and I think they've had 4 or 5 of them, somebody's doing something right. And they're very solid in the special teams. Radke is, to me, one of the best quarterbacks in the conference. I put him right up there, with the kids that have been first-team all-conference. You got to keep him in check. I mean, he is just confident right now in what he's doing. He's got a receiver that he goes to, but to me, he's playing like Johnny Manziel right now at A&M, and that's what's making that team go. Defensively, they run a very similar defense that we run, and it's something that people don't see every week. So, I think they're off to a great start, and it's going to be a very, very difficult game here, at home. Very difficult game. So a lot of challenges, but this is what makes this profession fun.
Coach DeMarco has seen firsthand the steps the programs have made around the conference to turn the PAC into a very relevant football conference in Division III.
Well, I remember, back when we were in the NAIA, and it was called the Pathetic Athletic Conference because, let's face it, you had W&J and maybe somebody else would be good. And then, we get into the league and we start realizing that W&J and Thomas More were very, very good. And then you start to see the escalation of what these programs are doing. And now, you got Carnegie, Mellon, and Case. Waynesburg made a run at it. Westminster's back to where they were before. Every week, it's just it's like playing in the Big Ten. Anybody can beat you. And the league is granted. I saw a survey once that put us in the top 10 conferences in D3, and I think it's rightfully so. It just seems as though in the PAC, football is a really, really big deal to schools. And, they've done it. They've done it with additional coaching staff. They've done it with facilities. Let's face it, as a competitor, you want to be able to play against good people. There's nothing worse than going out there and beating somebody that's just not. You want to be able to compete against very, very good people. And I think that you asked all the coaches in the league, they love this. It's difficult, very difficult. And for us, our margin of error is very thin. And we know that. But like I said, this is what makes it a great profession.
Thanks to Geno DeMarco and Geneva College for being on the PAC Football Focus. Up next week is St. Vincent College and third-year head coach Ron Dolciato. Stay tuned for the PAC Pregame Show coming up next on pacathletics.org.
I'm Joe Underko, Commissioner of the President's Athletic Conference. Want to know what makes the PAC so special? Here's a few reasons why.
Comprised of 10 private institutions and 2 affiliate members, the PAC remains unique in this era of high-pressure college athletics. Now sponsoring 21 sports as it celebrates over 60 years of competition, the PAC is regarded as one of the elite NCAA Division III conferences in the nation. Our student athletes excel in athletics as well as the classroom, with numerous postgraduate scholarship winners, over 150 academic All-Americans, and over 900 academic honorable recipients with a 3.6 GPA or higher in the past year alone. Want to learn more? Visit us at www.pacathletics.org or follow the President's Athletic Conference on social media.
Academic and athletic excellence since 1955, the President's Athletic Conference.
Welcome to the pregame show here on pacathletics.org. Andy Stanko with you, and joining me this week our Waynesburg University students, Brendan Keany, Donny Chedrick, and guys, before we take a look at Week 4 in the PAC, we can take a look back at Week 3, which was the first official week of conference play, and plenty of storylines to go around. What really stood out to you guys taking a look back at week number 3?
Well, I thought just looking at our Waynesburg University Yellow Jackets, a game against Carnegie Mellon University last week, the Waynesburg defensive front seven held Sam Benger to under 200 yards, which normally you would think...
Well, under 100 through 3 quarters, it was a pretty good day, and then 64-yard run in the fourth quarter, and that's that for the game.
Yeah, and you would normally come to the conclusion that, well, Sam Benger still had a very good day, but the fact of the matter is, as you just said, under 100 yards into the fourth quarter. He broke off his long for the day, 64 yards. Also had broken off a couple 15, 20-yard gashes against the Waynesburg defense. But Waynesburg, the defense for Waynesburg stood up last week and sort of gave this team some hope, showing that even if the offense can't get it done, the defense can keep them in this game. They did so last week. The score was 7-7 at the half. A Guthrie missed field goal held Waynesburg from leading that game after 2 quarters, and then...
So you're saying you think that front seven is legit, your big takeaway?
Oh, absolutely.
And Sam Benger's still very, very good at what he does.
Yes, Sam Benger is a very good running back. The offensive line at CMU is very good, because it just goes to show you in all the other games, Benger breaks everything. It's not like Waynesburg's the first defense he's ever he's never played against. And this team, Brad Grinnan, Zach Machuga, Emilio DeStefano, James Roundtree, these are guys that have stepped up all year, have stepped up for a couple years for Coach Shepis and this defense. And it's one that I think could even win Waynesburg an extra game or two coming down the stretch of this season.
Brendan Keany, thoughts on week number 3?
Well, I think you got to look at the big game, Thomas More and W&J.
Yes, sir.
And it was not as close a game as we had originally thought it was going to be. Thomas More really put it to the W&J defense and held W&J to just a couple of first downs. I mean, it was all Thomas More. Only 7-3 going into the second half, but Thomas More really came to play. 448 yards of offense for the Saints, 202 on the ground, 246 through the air. And I think what's really exciting for Thomas More is that C.T. Tarrant only touched the ball 11 times for 15 total yards. It shows that Thomas More offense is becoming more well-balanced. Dalen Garland had another fantastic day, 8 receptions, 139 yards. I think Thomas More and Case Western, with their 55-0 victory over Grove City, are really establishing themselves as the powers of the PAC.
I was really impressed with the shootout in Greenville, Pennsylvania. Teal College and Bethany. Teal scoring on 3 separate return touchdowns, and Bethany. Coach Garbu, we spoke earlier in the season about his first-year starter, Chase Keeneman, and how conservative that offense was, and he just let it rip. Over 500 yards of total offense a week ago. He was your PAC Offensive Player of the Week, completing 39 of 50 passes, over 400 yards, fourth quarter touchdown passes of 40 yards or plus 3 separate times, 3 touchdowns on the ground, and that still wasn't enough to beat Bethany in week 1. It was a great slate of games. Thomas More, W&J, of course. For the 4th straight year, the home team has won that game and won big. And the game, of course, this year, Crestview Hills, Kentucky. Well, let's put that week to bed. Move on to week 4. And we start with a noon kickoff in Crestview Hills, Kentucky. It's Carnegie Mellon traveling to number 18, Thomas More. And since joining the PAC as an affiliate member in 2014, CMU has not played against Thomas More. The Tartans had not played against Waynesburg either in conference play and got a 35-23 win Saturday over the Jackets. And speaking of that win for Carnegie Mellon, Sam Benger, 28 carries, 193 yards, held under 100 yards through the first 3 quarters, but he ripped off a big 64-yard run late in the fourth quarter to really seal this game for Carnegie Mellon. And also, Sam Benger still leads Division III in rushing with 222 yards a game, but I would say the biggest storyline coming out of that game for both teams has to be the health and the contingency plan for the quarterbacks. Brian Jangro went out with an injury in the third quarter. In comes Alex Klein. In his first pass, an 18-yard out on 3rd and 10, a strike to convert, and the next play is a touchdown, a 22-yard run by Sam Benjer. Klein finished 7 for 11, 121 yards, a couple of touchdowns, and a big 50-yard completion to John Prather in the fourth quarter to respond to Waynesburg taking a lead in that quarter. A couple of really nice balls on fades, and on the other side, Thomas More comes off the win against W&J, and what can you say? It's been Thomas More or W&J every season dating back to 2006, and Thomas More is in the driver's seat once again. The home team had won the matchup in each of the last 4 meetings, make it now each of the last 5 meetings. And I have to start with the Thomas More defense. I never thought I'd see the day where W&J would be held to 204 yards of total offense, just 10 first downs, 3 for 16 on third down. The matchup was Pete Coughlin against this Thomas More defense. He finished 15 for 32, 170 yards, held under 5.5 yards in attempt, 1 touchdown to 2 interceptions, and Thomas More dominated time of possession, held the ball for 38 minutes, and more than W&J in every single quarter, including the second half where Thomas More held the ball for 22 of 30 minutes. I turn to you guys now. Both of these teams 1-0 in conference play, doing it well, having their stars take care of business last week. What do we see in this matchup?
Well, Thomas More has to be riding very high after a blowout victory over the presidents of Washington and Jefferson last week. And I'd like to point out, I loved your point on the Carnegie Mellon quarterback controversy, as you will. Brian Jangro last week, really not on target at all. He had plenty of opportunities in the first half that if he hits those receivers, it is a much larger gap between Carnegie Mellon and the Waynesburg University Yellow Jackets, because he would have guys 15, 20 yards downfield, wide open, would be easy touchdowns overthrown. Alex Klein comes into the game after Jangro suffered an injury in the third quarter. He pretty much stepped right in and just started firing the ball around all he wanted. You mentioned his numbers, 7 of 11, 121, 2 touchdowns, no picks. Had those 2 touchdown passes on end zone fades where Josh Mundell had terrific coverage on the receivers, but coming down with it were the Carnegie Mellon University Tartans. So they got the upper hand there. And Jangro on the season, looking at him, 22 of 47, 327, 1 touchdown, 3 picks. So he has turned the ball over a little bit, had an interception thrown in the end zone to Justin Wilco last week. And I think that's just something Thomas More will eat up if Jangro is in this game. Outscoring opponents 38.3 to 23, outgaining opponents 520 to 358. And the defense has been great for Thomas More, but the offense, plenty of weapons as well. Brendan Kuntz, 744 yards, 9 touchdowns, has not thrown an interception this year. C.T. Tarrant, 52 carries, 340 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Javier Pitts, 31 attempts, 201 yards, and a touchdown. So really a dual, even triple threat running tandem.
Oh, yeah. They have a bunch of guys who can get it done on the ground.
Even if you add Luke Zajac to that, who had over 30 carries and over 100 yards on the season, and then out to the receivers as well. So Thomas More has ways to make plays offensively and can certainly shut down and take advantage. If Jangro is healthy enough to play in this game.
Well, either way, it's going to be a first-year starter against this Thomas More defense that just manhandled W&J's offense. And Pete Coughlin might be the best player in the conference, and he was held under 200 yards. So
very true.
It's a tall order either way.
And Alex Klein did show a lot of positives last week against Waynesburg, but the Waynesburg secondary isn't what the Waynesburg front 7 is. That front 7 for Waynesburg is something pretty incredible, shutting down Sam Benjer as well as they did. If Benjer can run on the Thomas More defense, this could be a much closer game than some people may anticipate, but this is a very important game when you look at the standings.
Oh,
because
absolutely.
Thomas More and CMU right there at 4 and 5 in the conference, still early in the season, but
1-0.
Yeah. And these are 2 teams that can very well make a run at a PAC title.
Brendan Keany.
Yeah, I really like Thomas More. I think we talked a lot about Thomas More, W&J, and obviously, as you've mentioned, Andy, the de facto PAC championship game for the last several years. You said dating back to 2006, and you mentioned holding W&J to just over 200 yards of total offense. 34 rushing yards is all they gave up against the Presidents. And you said they held the Presidents to 10 first downs. And what I want to point out, Dalen Garland, we talked a lot about after the first week of the season, Andy, how the loss of Goose Colehorn as a viable option in the passing game.
And he was a top 3 receiver,
exactly,
bar none last year.
Absolutely. And then Dalen Garland has come in, and he's had a great season so far. Another fantastic day against the Presidents. 8 receptions, 139 yards, and a touchdown. Brendan Kuntz, once again, 19 of 31, 246, 2 TDs, and he gained 85 yards on the ground. So he's also a dual threat kind of guy. I really like the Thomas More offense, but I think you said it perfectly when you hold W&J to 9 points, a team that gained over 1,200 yards of offense in its first 2 games, to 9 points. That's an incredible day for you, and you're going to have a real good time winning a lot of games this year. As for Carnegie Mellon, Benger, he had 193 yards. As you mentioned, 64 yards came on one play. But I think it's interesting that Jangro was 8 of 20, 74 yards in a pick, and then Klein came in and he played very well. 7-11, 121, 2 touchdowns. I think one thing you do have to mention, however, is that with the stout Carnegie Mellon run game, how much did Waynesburg's defense kind of wear down towards the end of the game?
Yep.
They spent a lot of time on the field.
3 touchdowns in the final 4 drives for the CMU offense.
Exactly, and that's kind of what I'm getting at. I don't know if that's a direct reflection on either quarterback. I think Waynesburg just played inspired defense for the first 3 quarters. But Carnegie Mellon went out and did its job. It's going to have a tall order to go into Crestview Hills and beat Thomas More. But as you said, Donnie, it's an important game in the standings, and Carnegie Mellon's looking to be in the top third for sure this year.
Obviously, the key matchup, Thomas More's run defense against Sam Benger. Thomas More, the top rushing attack and rushing defense in the PAC, holding opponents to 49 yards a game on 1.7 yards per carry. Brendan, as you mentioned, held W&J to just 34 yards on the ground. And Dalen Garland might emerge as that next top receiver in the PAC. Statistically, it's Jesse Zubik, Brendan Lynch from Case, and Dalen Garland as your statistical leaders through the first 3 weeks. I do, however, look for CMU to start a little bit faster than the Tartans did against Waynesburg. They really struggled in the first half. The only score for CMU came after a Waynesburg fumble and turnover. But we will shift gears to our next matchup. We head to Latrobe, Pennsylvania, where the St. Vincent Bearcats, 3-0 to start the season. Grove City Wolverines still searching for that first win since the 2013 season. St. Vincent won last season's meeting 48-28. St. Vincent scored on a blocked punt, a fumble return, and an interception for a touchdown. So essentially, Grove City spotted the Bearcats 21 points. The Wolverines outgained St. Vincent 449-406, but turned the ball over 4 times. And as far as top returning guys, Brett Pinson for Grove City, 6 catches, 103 yards, 2 touchdowns. And both quarterbacks for both teams currently did not play in that game. Brett LaFoon, still in high school, as well as Derek Stewart for St. Vincent, not yet with the school. So Grove City coming off a 55-0 loss to Case Western Reserve. Grove City, man, really the short end of the stick when you look at the schedule and you see Pete Coughlin in the first game and you see Rob Kuda in the next game when it comes to PAC opponents. It was a night game at Grove City, delayed several times. It lasted 4 hours in all. And really, the Wolverines, only 136 yards of total offense, 1 for 16 on 3rd down, 6 total first downs, 3 and out 10 times. Brett LaFoon got a taste of what the better defenses look like in the PAC, and it was a challenge for him. 11 for 34, 74 yards, 3 interceptions, 4 sacks. That's under 3 yards an attempt. But Wesley Schools, if you want to find a bright spot for Grove City, it was the young running back, over 100 yards against W&J, 72 yards on 13 carries against Case Western. That's good for 5.5 yards a carry. However, he did lose a fumble. And when you lose 55-0, I'm not sure how many positives you can take out of that. Connor Shoemaker, Kyle Byer, both interceptions against Case Western. On the other side, St. Vincent, a win over Geneva, 28-21, in a game that pitted 2 teams that won week 2 against each other. Geneva outgained St. Vincent 365-276, but really one of the turning points in the game, scoring off of a snap that just went over the head of the Geneva punter, a fumble return for a touchdown. Geno Dorset, almost 100 yards on the ground, a couple of touchdowns. Shavonte Kraft, a touchdown run following a Geneva fumble. Damon Black, DJ Ocean Kelly, each with over 60 yards receiving. So I'll turn it loose to you guys. St. Vincent, a chance to start 4-0, a team coming off consecutive 4-6 seasons, a team that's best season was 6 wins a couple of years ago. This St. Vincent team could be for real, could be cruising towards a top half conference finish here in 2016.
Yeah, and St. Vincent really found some new life with quarterback Derek Stewart, a senior transfer, came from the state of California, and he has done nothing but shine, Andy. Almost 800 yards through the air, 6 touchdowns, only 3 times he was intercepted. Can run a little bit, 50 yards on the ground, but only about 2 yards of carries. He's run 25 times. But a dual threat rushing attack, some guys that you mentioned, Shavonte Kraft, 187 yards and 4 touchdowns on the season. Geno Dorset, 189 yards and 3 touchdowns on the season. A couple receivers that Stewart can go to, Damon Black, 20 catches, 299 yards, 3 touchdowns. DJ Ocean Kelly behind him, Dalton Dietrich behind him. But also another thing that has sort of evolved over time, the St. Vincent offensive line. A couple veterans now on that line that came in as youngsters a few years ago. Colton Hearn has moved from tackle to guard. Reed Brinkoff has really cemented himself as a pretty good center in the PAC. And, you know, another thing that St. Vincent kind of knew, they probably looked at this schedule thinking, got to jump out to a fast start, because look at the next 4 weeks on the St. Vincent College football schedule. At Case Western,
Ooh.
At Westminster,
Ooh.
home against Thomas More, and then traveling to Washington to take on the presidents of W&J.
That is a murderer's
Yeah,
row.
before St. Vincent hosts Waynesburg on November 5th. So that whole month of October is a brutal month for St. Vincent. So who knows? If they can get a surprise in there, they could be en route to one of the top 4 or 5 spots in the PAC, but time will tell.
Yeah. Starts with this week. St. Vincent, Grove City, Brendan Keany.
Well, I think St. Vincent needs to feel pretty fortunate that they came away from Geneva with a victory. Only 10 first downs to Geneva's 24. Geneva definitely had an easier time moving the ball. Total offensive yards, St. Vincent was outgained 365 to 276. But the bottom line is that they got the win. They found a way to get it done, and they are undefeated heading into this matchup with Grove City, who's coming off of a pretty crushing defeat, 55-0. Against Case Western. One thing I want to highlight for Grove City is that they will have a very difficult time winning football games when you give up 51 points in the first quarter in the past 2 weeks, and that's exactly what they've done. They spotted 30 points to W&J just 2 weeks ago, and then 21 points to Case Western last week, and it's going to be very difficult to win games when you play from that far behind. It's understandable to be down by a touchdown or a field goal after the first quarter, but when you're down double digits time after time, it's going to be hard to get into a game, especially with a younger quarterback and a younger running back, really. So for Grove City, I think the focus needs to be 2 things: getting off to a quicker start, and number 2, limiting the big plays. They had a tough time again with big plays against Case Western. If they can somehow limit that and keep, the secondary's got to do a better job of limiting those plays, and I think they can put up a good fight against St. Vincent.
St. Vincent, 28-21 winners over Geneva. Geneva's defense might be one of the best kept secrets in the PAC, and consistently now through the first couple of weeks towards the top in terms of total defense. But St. Vincent, under Coach Dolciato, has been so good at taking the ball away. I said this in week 1, but through the last 2 years at St. Vincent, the Bearcats came away into 2016 with 51 takeaways, plus 16 in the turnover margin, consistently good in the kick return games and special teams in general. And this iteration of St. Vincent, one thing I love about this Bearcats team is they're in the middle in a lot of statistical categories, because offensively it's hard to be up there with Thomas More, W&J, Case Western when they're scoring 45 points a game, especially early in the season with a small sample size. But you see St. Vincent 11 for 11 in the red zone, 10 touchdowns. You can't argue with those results. And defensively, you have 4 red zone trips that netted 0 points for opposing teams, and then 2 other trips that net field goals. with all of those things going together, with solid special teams play, with the fact that Coach Dulciato seems to finally have a quarterback here who is the guy. He's rolled with 2 quarterback systems each of the last 2 years. Derek Stewart lit the world on fire in week 1, and since then, the numbers haven't been so high. 12 for 22, 144 yards, but the key for me is no interceptions. And we talk about first-year starters at quarterback on this show all the time and how hard it is to play quarterback in this conference with the defenses that are out there. And if he is able to take care of that football, Donnie, you just ran through a ton of playmakers on this St. Vincent team. I loved Kraft and Dorsett in the backfield and Damon Black and Ocean Kelly on the outside. And you touched on the offensive line, and I completely agree with you. St. Vincent, a chance to move to 4-0, match the win total for the last couple of seasons. They're at home to do it. You see a team that really has a chance to grab this opportunity and perhaps be like Westminster of last season. And for Grove City, Brendan, I know that the starts are tough, but I think these numbers that you see for the Wolverines are skewed. The fact that they played against Case Western, W&J, they were very competitive with Geneva, and they have found their guys, whether it's Brett LaFoon at quarterback, Nick Ponikvar at receiver, Wesley Schools at running back. They're not experimenting. They're plugging, getting their reps against the other PAC schools, and starting to figure some things out. And I think their time will come later in the season. But we will now shift gears to Waynesburg, Pennsylvania. And we are all very similar with this matchup, having media obligations for this game. Case Western Reserve Spartans, Waynesburg University Yellow Jackets. Last year, Case Western eviscerated Waynesburg in a lopsided fashion. Rob Kuda in the win last year over Waynesburg, 45-14, Case Western in Cleveland. 6 total touchdowns, 25 for 28 through the air, 268, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, 3 touchdowns on the ground. He had 3 rushing touchdowns in the first 15 minutes and 8 seconds of the game. And Case Western happens to be coming off of a 55-0 win over Grove City, in which Case Western offensively in the first half didn't play very well and turned the ball over on downs a couple of times and turned the ball over a couple times and still led by 3 touchdowns. Waynesburg, on the other hand, played the most competitive game that it had all season against Carnegie Mellon. Waynesburg took a lead in the fourth quarter, 17-14. But unfortunately, the big story coming out of the game is quarterback Jake Doherty out, injured on a 2-point conversion attempt, trying to run it in a 5-wide formation. Broken clavicle, out for the year. Tyler Perrone is your backup, and Donnie, I know you have stuff on Tyler Perrone. What can you tell me about him and this Waynesburg offense moving forward?
Well, Tyler Perrone, I just want to look back to his high school days in the WPIAL. He was a kid that went to Seton LaSalle, and in his senior season, he had the 4th most yards in the entire WPIAL, and he was behind 3 guys named Ben DiNucci, who now attends the University of Pittsburgh, Brett Brumbaugh, who now attends Duquesne and has set multiple records in whippeal passing, and Ryan Williams, who played at an absolute powerhouse of Clareton. Just a kid that he has the skills, probably will be a little bit gun-shy in this game, making his first collegiate start. Seton Hill transfer, but he was redshirted in that year there, so he's a redshirt freshman coming into Waynesburg, making his first start against Case Western, who is a team that can very much win the President's Athletic Conference. So this is a kid who he believes in Coach Shepis' system. Coach Shepis believes in him, thinks of the things that Perrone learned from Jake Doherty. He said Doherty was a great mentor to him, taught him really the ins and outs of playing football at Waynesburg. As weird as that sounds, it's just the different type of atmosphere that he came from at Seton Hill, and a relationship with Carter Hill that Perrone said will be a great tool to him. Carter Hill was a guy who had
all PAC first team 2014,
big time success as a Waynesburg University Yellow Jacket just a few years ago. Knows the offense, knows how this team operates, able to help out Perrone. So Perrone might have to take some things slow, need to get that running game going. We've looked at that in weeks past. Chad Walker, only 41 yards last week on 9 carries, but a long of 27. So that means he had 8 carries for 14 yards beyond that. Whitney White, 7 attempts, 33 yards and a touchdown, but a long of 23. So he had 6 carries for 10 yards beyond that. That running game really needs to get going because, you know, the run game makes the pass game easier. It opens up the pass, get play action, plays coming. And the wide receivers for Waynesburg showed up a little bit last week against Case Western. You saw the seniors, Kevin Barnes, Tim Cooper. Those guys combined for 2 touchdowns and 11 receptions between them and over 150 yards combined. And junior Mitch Kendra has been at it again. The leading receiver on this Waynesburg Yellow Jacket squad, 7 catches, 94 yards last week. And we've already mentioned the defense played very well, stood up against one of the best runners in the PAC, Sam Benger. Brad Grinnan, 8 tackles, 1.5 tackles for loss. Anelio DeStefano, 7 tackles with a sack. Zach Machuga with 6 more tackles. And Michael Heasley, a linebacker that stood out in this game for the Yellow Jackets, 9 tackles, 1 tackle for loss, had a sack, and also a forced fumble that was recovered by James Roundtree. So if the Yellow Jackets can create turnovers, we'll see. Going to be a tall task against Case Western.
It's a different challenge against Case Western, though.
Yeah.
Quarterback position.
Yes, and Rob Kuda, one of the best in the PAC, perhaps the best. A guy that was all UAA and all PAC first team in 2015. Threw a touchdown pass in all 10 games last season, and you mentioned before, 6 total touchdowns against the Yellow Jackets last season. That can't happen if you're Waynesburg this year, but we'll kind of see what happens with that. But Kuda, a dual threat weapon to look out for.
Yeah, and I thought about this, like, what could Waynesburg do to win this game against Case Western? And my thought was, if you can contain Rob Kuda, make him throw, then that would be a start. But the problem is, Rob Kuda just went out and proved that he can help Case Western blow out Grove City 55-0. You think of Rob Kuda as a guy who generally rushes for about 200 or about 100 yards, 150 yards a game, as well as throwing for about 200 yards a game. But against Grove City, he had a different kind of game plan. He only ran for 8 times. Of course, college is a little different because sacks are figured into runs, but his net gained yards on the ground was only 12. What he did was carve up Grove City through the air, 24-42, 337 yards, and 4 touchdowns. So it's going to be a very tall order for Waynesburg's secondary, and they can also, the Spartans can run as well. They have a ton of guys who ran for significant plays. Jacob Burke, 9 carries, 71 yards. He had 2 touchdowns. The running game is solid for Case Western without Rob Kuda, and if Rob Kuda can do it through the air, it could be a long day for Waynesburg. But if Tyler Perrone is in there, it's going to be interesting to see what the coaching staff is allowing him to do in his first start. Last year we saw Jake Doherty in his freshman campaign. Very conservative. Will it be a similar game style? It's going to be hard to do that with a team like Case Western who can put points on really anyone in the PAC. So it's going to be interesting to see how the coaches approach this game and how they handle Tyler Perrone.
Case Western comes into this week scoring 100 points through 2 games, allowing 17 points through 2 games. Those splits turn into 50 points per game and 8.5 points per game allowed per game. So it's been very good for Case this season. I've been so impressed with Coach Debelak's group, especially defensively. You lose 6 of the top 7 guys from that 34 front, and all 7 guys were all PAC in some form or fashion, 5 of them honorable mentions, and you still have one of the best run defenses in the conference, giving up under 70 yards per game, under 3 yards a carry, and that third down mark is ridiculous. 6 for 32 opponents are against Case Western. 10 3-and-outs against Grove City. Forced for that Grove City offense. And it just comes from all over the place offensively. I do want to highlight receiver Brendan Lynch, who was outstanding last week against Grove City, matching a school record with 222 receiving yards, his first career 100-yard game. He was an all-PAC honorable mention back in 2014, but this is certainly Certainly a big matchup for the Jackets to see what will happen with Tyler Perrone in his first career start, and if anyone can slow down that Case Western offense. We will shift gears to Bethany, West Virginia for our next matchup, and it is the Westminster Titans, a team that won last season against Bethany 38-24, and it was the most points given up in a win by Westminster all of last season, even though Bethany outgained Westminster 342-307. However, Bethany turned the ball over 5 times, 4 interceptions, 1 fumble. And when Bethany was threatening to take the lead in the third quarter, Gator Phillips intercepted a Lincoln Reyes pass and returned it 89 yards for a touchdown to go up 2 scores. And you're looking at a Westminster team that won its last 7 regular season, or in its last 7 regular season games dating back to last season. The Titans have allowed 41 points total. That's 6 points per game. The last time Westminster lost was September 26, 2015, Week 4 against Thomas More last season. It's a 9-game win streak for the Titans. If Westminster's able to win this week, they will go 1 full calendar year without a loss, which would just be outstanding for Coach Benzel and for the program. And Westminster coming off a bye, only 7 points allowed through 2 weeks, and that touchdown came late in the fourth quarter against Waynesburg off of a short field after a fumble. Meanwhile, Bethany comes into the matchup, losers in a 57-47 shootout against Teal College. And going into Week 3, Chase Keenman averaged under 5 yards per passing attempt. And I spoke with Coach Garvey on the Focus, and he said they were bringing him along slowly, calling conservative games. They weren't throwing it down the field in the early part of the season. Bethany was shut out by Geneva in Week 2. Jalen Holmes didn't appear for Bethany in Week 3, so it was up to Keenman to get the job done. And Chase Keenman is your PAC Offensive Player of the Week with 511 yards of total offense, over 400 passing, almost 100 on the ground, passed for 3 touchdowns in the fourth quarter, ran for 3 touchdowns. Bethany trailed 43-21 in the fourth and went on 4 scoring drives of 90 seconds or fewer, all of at least 50 yards, 3 of over 70 yards. Keenman threw touchdown passes of 42, 45, and 52 yards to 3 different receivers and ran for a touchdown to cut the Teal lead to 3 points with 2 minutes to play. Unfortunately for Bethany, the defense couldn't get a stop, but you look at Westminster, and it will certainly be hard to put up 47 points on this Titan defense. What say you, gentlemen?
Yeah, Westminster overall the best defense in the PAC. You take a look at it across the board. For the most part, the Titans have held their opponents off the board in any way, shape, or form.
One touchdown on a short field that wasn't their fault.
Yeah,
that is it.
And looking at Bethany coming in from last week, losing a shootout game, as you mentioned, Chase Keenman had over 400 yards, 3 touchdowns. I'd be very surprised if he did that against the Titan defense. But looking at Westminster offensively, Paul Colombo has continued to be a dual-threat player, leading the team in passing and in rushing. 345, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception through the air, 173 yards and 1 touchdown on the ground. So that number, rushing-wise, may surprise you because someone that has struggled is running back Dawn McKinley, who was one of the better running backs in the President's Athletic Conference a year ago.
Yep, 1,000 yards.
And now in his junior season, 41 carries, 128 yards, and 0 touchdowns, averaging just 3.1 yards per carry. He was shut down against Waynesburg in Week 2. That was the last game that Westminster played. Only 47 yards held him to just over 2 yards a pop on the ground. So McKinley has been shut down. If he breaks out of his shell, Westminster could really get this offense going. And looking at other weapons that this team has, Larice Jackson, Demetrius Bentley, Bryson Paulinelli, all 3 of those guys can contribute in the run game, the receiving game, and in special teams. All 3 very big play threats for Westminster. And after this game, 2 big games coming up for the Titans, both of them at home, hosting Thomas More on October 1st, and then St. Vincent coming to town, a big test against Westminster on October 8th.
To your point, though, Westminster has Thomas More, W&J, and Case all at home this season, which I think is big for Coach Scott Benzel. And if this team wants to compete for a conference championship, those are games that they're going to need to be in and winning to do that.
Yeah, and a lot of people say offense wins games. defense wins championships. That could hold true for Westminster come season's end. But I think the offense, if Dawn McKinley gets going, this is a very dangerous team. The defense has been there. Matt Quinn, one of the best players in the PAC on the defensive side of the ball. He is really the forefront of that steel curtain-like defense for Westminster. So we'll see where this team ends up at the end of the year. But just remember that saying, if Westminster is playing for a PAC title.
I look at Bethany, and I feel like we've had a pretty difficult time trying to figure out what this team is so far.
Yeah, we did not predict 57-47 with Teal after being shut out by Geneva in a game that was scoreless for 3 quarters to start that game.
Exactly. And one thing I think we talked about beforehand was that Bethany, if they wanted to win games this year, was going to have to rely on defense in the running game. And then Keenman goes out and he just lights up the scoreboard. And of course, you mentioned they wanted to take it slow with Keenman, and that's fine. I understand that. He's a new quarterback. But another thing we mentioned, you guys already went through the stats. The main one that I'll take you through, 39 of 50, 417 yards, 3 touchdowns and 2 interceptions through the air. And that is fantastic. We talk about this all the time. If you have a quarterback in the President's Athletic Conference who can put up those kind of numbers, you have a chance to win every single week. And one thing that I think is encouraging for Bethany is getting some of their playmakers involved. You've talked about it for a couple weeks now, Andy, trying to get Tyler Ambush involved in the passing game, and he got involved a little bit. 18 receptions, 171 yards, and a touchdown. So you see they tried to make it a point. Keenman, you're going to go to Ambush as much as you can, and they did a fairly nice job. So I like what I see out of Keenman, especially since that was only his 3rd game. But, of course, he's going up, as you guys have mentioned. There's really not much more you can say about Westminster other than they've given up 7 points through 2 games, and their offense has gotten it done. Westminster definitely looking to be one of the better teams in the PAC as they were last year. They're going to be right up there. But this cannot be a trap game for Westminster. Bethany probably has some confidence on the offensive side of the ball. Don't let this be a trap game with a couple of difficult tests coming up in the coming weeks. You got to take care of business if you want to keep at the top of the PAC standings.
I'll say this. I'm looking for Bethany's freshman, Raekwon Wright, played in place of Jalen Holmes, 89 yards on the ground on over 7 yards a carry, 4 catches, 78 yards, and a touchdown. That's a pretty explosive day for a freshman. Now, he did fumble, and Teal returned an interception fumble and a block punt for a touchdown. And talking to Coach Garvey, last year the defense had so many numbers that went against it in terms of scoring and points allowed, where it was turnovers that led directly to points, and you want to clean that up if you're Bethany. Take care of the football against Westminster. However, Westminster's defense may be so good that Bethany's offense might not be on the field very long to turn the football over. I will say this. Westminster dominates time of possession, runs the football effectively, protects its passer, and protects the football. Paul Colombo just 1 interception on 39 pass attempts and has the longest run in the PAC this season of 78 yards against Waynesburg. Bethany, however, is at home, is at night. Bethany is 3-0 at home night games, including a win over Waynesburg in 2014, a win over W&J in 2013, and in both occasions they were the biggest wins of the season in both times. So we saw Geneva take care of Bethany at home at night. We'll see if Bethany can do the same against a very good Westminster football team. Finally, we get to our featured matchup of the week. Teal College visiting Beaver Falls, the Geneva Golden Tornadoes. I had a conversation with Coach DeMarco this week, and he is all in on the triple option. And last week, Geneva got very close to beating St. Vincent, 28-21 the final score. Bearcats coming out on top. Geneva fumbled the football 4 times, had multiple quarterbacks injured during the game. Devin Koloski didn't appear beyond early in the second quarter. Had a punt gone wrong that ended up as a St. Vincent touchdown 1 play later, and another set up in St. Vincent inside the Geneva 20-yard line, and St. Vincent scored immediately there. Really, talking to Coach DeMarco, Geneva, the problem wasn't the triple option and exchanges, it was just guys fighting for extra yardage, and when you turn the football over, that's not a recipe for success. However, Geneva had the ball inside the St. Vincent 20-yard line with just under 5 minutes to play. Unfortunately, Trayvon Marshall picks up a first down on a 4th and short but fumbles, or 3rd and short, but fumbles, St. Vincent recovers, and Geneva can't get back deep, and that's your ball game. Geneva ate up almost 40 minutes of clock, despite turning the ball over four times, and ran for 271 yards on 68 carries, and it was more than that because negative plays count against you in college, and that includes the punt that went wrong that counted for negative 27 yards. On the other side, Teal already matched its win total and conference win total from last season with a 57-47 win over Bethany. 3 takeaways, an interception return for a touchdown, a fumble return for a touchdown, a blocked punt for a touchdown. And outside of the fourth quarter when Chase Keeneman went berserk passing the football, the defense was all right for Coach Bloom. Radke, 263 yards, 3 touchdowns in the air, 151 yards, 2 touchdowns on the ground. Wasn't sacked, wasn't tackled for a loss. I'd say that's a perfect game from him. And so this is a game where it's homecoming for Geneva. These two teams haven't played since 2013 when Zach Hayward was quarterbacking the Golden Tornadoes. A very talented guy for this Geneva program, but it's a very different team in a very different place right now. The last time Geneva won on a homecoming was 2013 over St. Vincent. The last 2 homecoming games, Geneva's lost by a combined score of 77-10. So guys, what do we see? Geneva, Teal, early season PAC matchup.
Well, I think a guy you immediately have to look at is Ryan Radke. 630 yards, 6 touchdowns, 1 interception this season through the air. Almost 300 yards and 3 touchdowns on the ground. Had 2 rushing touchdowns last week. And also looking at Geneva, Javid Ellis has been a guy, hasn't had the same success through the air as Radke has had, 9 of 25.
Yep.
$129.
It's the triple option, and that it's still a process for Geneva right now.
Yeah, and right now, still no passing touchdowns for Ellis and 1 interception. But as a triple option works, the quarterback can run the ball. With Marshall back there, 70 carries, over 300 and a touchdown. Ellis has 92 yards and 2 touchdowns on this season. So Geneva can get things going with that triple option, but Ryan Radke is a guy who really makes plays, always gives the Teal Tomcats a feeling that they are in the ball game, that they can win the ball game. Did it a few weeks ago against St. Vincent. They almost pulled that one out. Last week, really leaned on the kid, won 57-47 against Bethany in a shootout. But this is a very big swing game for Teal. Right now sitting at 3rd in the PAC standings, 2-1 overall, 1-0
Yeah.
with a lot of teams in the PAC. But I say it's a swing game because the next 3 weeks after this one, hosting W&J, at Case Western, at Carnegie Mellon after this one. So a very big game for the Teal Tomcats, but
it's a game they can't overlook.
Yes,
Bethany, 21-0. Geneva shut them down.
Yeah, and also Geneva's a team that at home, on homecoming, can surprise Teal. Teal can have an off game. Geneva can bump up a few spots in the PAC, but Teal has to lean on Ryan Radke. They have some guys around him to make plays, but also look at Teal defensively, creating some turnovers this season. 7 interceptions and 4 fumble recoveries coming from the Teal defense. Didn't look great last week, giving up 47 points to Bethany, but if the offense can outscore the defense, you'll win every time.
Thank you, John Madden.
Waiting for that.
My big thing about this game is that you're looking at 2 teams. Teal had a very solid shot to start the season 3-0. They lost a close game to St. Vincent, and Geneva, same thing. They could be 2-1. Outside that game against Frostburg State, they've played very well this year. You're looking at 2 teams that are certainly on the rise, and most of that for at least Teal is because of Ryan Radke. Every week that we do this, Andy, I feel like we come in here and say, Ryan Radke had a perfect game, so-and-so yards through the air, so-and-so yards through the ground, didn't turn the ball over, and to this point, I would assume that means he's having a perfect season, and he's really helping Teal reinvent themselves. They have been a tough out for every team. Even their loss to St. Vincent was a close one. Geneva, always a tough team at home, and that is one thing they have going for them. Geneva, we talked about how their offense might struggle a little bit with the triple option. It's a new system for them. They struggled against Frostburg State, and then they came out and they blanked Bethany using solid D and got just enough. 21-0 they beat Bethany, and then this past game, they had over 300 yards of total offense. They played solid. So I think Geneva is picking it up every single week, as is Teal. And who would have thought that Teal versus Geneva in week 4 was going to be maybe the most intriguing matchup on the docket?
And in speaking to Coach DeMarco this week, this didn't make it into the interview, but I asked him, was there any doubt after week 1 in Frostburg State? And he said that Frostburg in their conference, 2 of their best rivals run the triple option. They knew that was going to be a challenge, and it was a 31-10 loss. That game was 17-10 in the third quarter, and it got away from them because of turnovers. And you look at this game, Donny, you mentioned the takeaways for Teal. Teal first in turnover margin, +8 with 11 takeaways, just 3 giveaways. Geneva last in turnover margin with 3 takeaways, 7 giveaways, 5 of them fumbles, -4. And Coach DeMarco said in the conversation that you can't just say not to turn the ball over and you'll be fine. But for Geneva, really with this style of play, it's impressive the fact that they've come from behind in a couple of these games already with this style of offense. And I have to give kudos to this defensive unit. Geneva kept up as a top 3 defense again by holding St. Vincent to 276 yards this past week, and Geneva even outgained St. Vincent 365 to 276. Just 1 run by Gennard Dorsett went for 67 yards and a touchdown. St. Vincent had just 10 first downs, 4 for 11 on third down, 0 for 3 on fourth down, just 3 times inside Geneva territory, or three times on fourth down inside Geneva territory, twice at the Geneva 30-yard line. So that defense stood tall time and time again, and I think they're flying under the radar with the points they've given up on a short field in week 1. But we'll see how good they really can be against a guy in Ryan Radke, who you touched on the fact that he has weapons, specifically now Eugene Bailey, 5 catches, 70 yards, 2 touchdowns last week. Jaquan Hicks, 4 catches, 113 yards, a 72-yard touchdown last week. And Nick Barca, 3.2 yards a carry for 71 yards, but he didn't turn the ball over. And this offense converted 6 of 13 on third down. Bethany only 2 of 13. And you had 4 straight drives for Teal. And this is when they can be really good. In the second and third quarters that lasted 5 minutes, 3:45, 4:45, 5:15, kept the defense off the field, scored 17 points, and then the defense and special teams scored to bookend those long possessions. That was a perfect stretch of football for Teal. Unfortunately for the Tomcats, Bethany went crazy in the fourth quarter and scored again and again and again. But at the end of the game, Bethany came back. It was 50-47 Teal, and Radke had a 37-yard run on a 3rd and 3 in the fourth quarter to steal the game. You want to see that out of your senior. You want to see that out of your leader. And I'll agree with you, Brendan. This is actually a really intriguing matchup for a pair of teams that are 2-1, 1-2 in the conference. But thank you all for joining us on the pregame show. Brendan Keany, thank you. Donny Chedrick, thank you very much. Be sure to join us next week when the focus shifts onto the St. Vincent Bearcats and head coach Ron Dolciato. Thank you for listening on PACathletics.org.